Understanding Enoch. There's a name you don't hear very often. We just actually heard it from the pulpit the other day, and it got my mind reeling. In a land long, long ago, in a way different life, there lived a broken little girl. I'm going to tell you the story of my salvation. I'm going to tell you how I got to this point that I'm at today. I lived in a family that was plagued with drugs and alcohol. My dad abused our family in every way you can abuse our family. My mom was the typical codependent, and us kids were the bystanders, and we were the little computer chips that soaked up everything that we saw. That graduated into my adult life. I really didn't know how to do anything without coping with drugs or alcohol. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow fade. I really did want to do things in life. I really did have dreams. But what happened was when you make a little exception and then you make another little exception, it's just a gradual fade into a life that you don't even realize is happening to you. And so during this time, it was during my 20s, I had two beautiful little girls, and I just knew that if I did it the right way, that they would never see the same person that I saw in my dad. So I actually had mirrors set up through my house, as crazy as that seems, a mirror on this wall and a mirror on this wall in the corners, and it was like a periscope. I could see all the way down the hall, and I could see when any of my kids were coming. I didn't want them to see that I was wearing a different hat. I was actually wearing a party hat in one room, and then I was wearing a mommy hat when I dealt with my children. I never wanted them to have that fear, that anxiety that I had as a little girl. That the feelings that I didn't even know how to deal through then had become feelings that I was masking as an adult. So I was in my kitchen, and I had my party hat on. My mommy hat had been left in the other room. I would smoke my cigarette or my joint, and I would put it all in this candy dish, put the lid on it so that the smoke wasn't rising in the room. I had a fan blowing it out the window. I thought I was doing pretty good, keeping my party hat in the other room. And I didn't realize that our daughter, who was about 16 months at the time, she came toddling into the room, and her little fingers touched the counter, and she pulled her little chin up, and she saw all my paraphernalia, everything that I kept hidden in my other room away from my children. She didn't know what that was, but I knew what that was. And as she looked at that, and then she looked at me, and she looked at that again, her eyes were filled with horror, not because of really what she saw, but because of what she saw in my eyes. I was horrified that my child would see the other side of me that I never, ever wanted her to grow up to be. I would constantly do things so that people would think I was such a good mom. I had a completely different life on the other side of my party room. That look of horror on my child's face reminded me of the same feelings that I had gone through. It's very interesting that we become like our parents. You wouldn't think that when you are a child and you see your parents do those things that you would ever want anything like that or to become like that. But it's true. Pastor John Lindell tells us often, what we do in moderation, our children will do in excess. And that is just the truth, whether it's good or bad. And they develop traits because it's modeled in front of them. We were actually going through a message on epic faith, which we absolutely loved every one of those messages. But there was something that he brought up in, actually it's in Genesis chapter 5, and I'm going to read this because it was so good. I had a friend call me right after and said, "Did you hear that?" Yes, I did. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had sons and daughters. After he had Methuselah. Something happens when you have kids. It's not just about you anymore, it's about somebody else. You are actually in charge of raising a child. We have a very beautiful, not just responsibility, but a right that we get to raise our children to be God seekers, or they don't become God seekers. We have eternal souls. Our kids either end up in heaven or they end up in hell. And that is the truth. That's a hard thing to grab a hold of. Kids change our perspective. If you want your child to grow up to be a God seeker, they actually have to see that modeled in front of them. If you want to see them have an easier life because it's not plagued with all the things that you can't stand about your own life, then model how to come out of that and how to be a God seeker, and your children will watch that too. When our parents come into Finding the Family, it's actually a beautiful thing to see them broken, because they realize their kids need something different. They need a different model than what they've been giving them. Parents who struggle with drugs and alcohol, they come to a breaking point when they realize that it's affecting their kids. We offer a one-year program that helps these families find the reset button. They learn how to overcome the addiction by allowing God to restore their families.